To be honest, I feel like this might be a hard story to tell, so I'm just going to try and say it as it comes to mind. I've made a few decisions that have taken me down very different paths. I used to try to make those decisions by weighing the pros and cons, trying to predict an outcome and trying to do the right or best thing. But actually, the best experiences have come from having no clear plan, but trusting that I can try something anyway. They've come from doing things without expectation and finding out that a lot more was possible than I could have imagined. After making a lot of changes, my main purpose has shifted to appreciating life as much as possible. It sounds very simple, but the more I've slowed down, the more I've found peace in things that are always unfolding. Hi, I'm Ling and I'm turning my apartment into a home art studio. Recently, I've been making a whole collection of drawings and paintings that are all based on my own experiences. But before this, I had a whole corporate career. It's actually quite a delicate thing to talk about so generally because I feel like so many very serious things happened while working in that environment. And a lot of those things aren't really my stories to share, but I guess it's pretty well known that there are a lot of challenges in the legal industry where I used to work, and especially serious mental health issues. A lot of people deal with chronic stress, burnout, and overworking, and there are still really high rates of depression and suicide. I also don't know where everyone's placed to handle topics like this, so I'm really not going to go into too much detail, but please take care while watching anyway. I think the other tricky thing is that a lot of those experiences are quite normalized because of how stable and prestigious the whole profession can seem. But I feel like it creates so much uncertainty around decisions to leave that career because there is such a big focus on stability. But I've realized with a lot of benefit from time that I've actually only ever really felt unsure about things that I've done without questioning, and I've really never questioned any of the decisions that I started making for myself. The only problem is that when you make a decision for yourself, it usually doesn't feel easy at the time. And I kind of wish I could just say that I hated my job as a corporate lawyer, so I quit one day and the next I suddenly became something new. But it really isn't that simple, and I also feel like that narrative is very idealized. This idea that you can just stop doing something one day and become something completely different the next isn't really that helpful when you're feeling very stuck. I think there are a lot of different paths that maybe don't sound as clear, but they can feel a bit more realistic and also hopefully more comforting. This journal has space for every single month of my life, which makes it very easy to see how everything fits into the scheme of things. Realistically, this part of my life was very small and it doesn't take up many pages, but there was something about the whole experience that had a really lasting impact. The biggest thing that changed was my perception of time. I was suddenly measuring everything completely differently, and my whole day was based around billable targets, which were tracked in 6-minute increments. I felt like there was a constant pressure to keep working and keep up with them. I remember on some nights my friends waited outside in case I finished in time for dinner, but instead I ate in a rush at my desk. And even when my dad became really sick, the only real alternative was bringing the same work home just a little bit earlier. The thing that felt the most uncomfortable to me though was that I was always counting down time, counting the hours until the end of the day or the days until the weekend. It also changed how I viewed time up until that point, because I had actually spent a lot of time just getting there. I felt like there was a huge cost or investment to the years that I'd put into studying. They also only took 10 graduates, and I'd gone through the entire competitive process, so it felt like leaving an opportunity behind. But when I shared this with a friend, they reminded me of all of the time I'd also spent learning, creating, and following creativity, which wasn't being given the same weight. I will never underestimate how much of our feelings our bodies can hold, and how quickly they can actually make changes for us. After long periods of stress, I had a lot of problems with my own health that I just couldn't seem to recover from, and a doctor basically told me that it would be impossible to if I kept pushing myself to work long hours. Eventually, I just became completely burnt out, and I was too tired to keep up with anything. Even things that I'd been excited to do felt exhausting, and it suddenly felt like my body was asking for a complete reset. The only problem is that it's a very difficult space to make change from. You don't really have the energy that you need to take care of yourself, let alone to make big decisions. I tried to look for other jobs before leaving, but even when the application closed at midnight, I was sending them in from the office bathroom. The other problem was that I couldn't really answer the question of what I wanted to do next. And I mentioned before that I think the narrative of the lawyer who becomes an artist or the consultant who becomes a baker isn't always helpful. I think it places too much expectation on jobs to become a purpose or identity, and it treats them as an end goal. It makes it seem like there is one path which really only has 2 points, where you are now and where you want to be. As though you'll just go from point A to point B. Point B will completely fulfill you, and there's not much more to it. But at the time, I didn't even know what my end goal would be, so for a while, I just felt stuck. I've realized that we can delay a decision as much as we like by thinking through the options or worrying about the future. But that delay will also be a decision not to act. So while we think about steering ourselves one way or another, and while we question whether we should jump in or not, we will still be drifting. Time will keep us moving, we'll just have no control over the direction that it's taking us in. And if you're not in the right place, I've found that your body will eventually make a decision for you. So instead of trying to keep pushing through, the best thing for me was to start letting everything come and go like the tides. When I eventually quit, it was less of a decision and more because I couldn't get up and do it for another day. I came to a complete stop physically, but still had so much emotional uncertainty, and I felt like I was carrying a lot of other people's risks and worries. So my friend asked me to write down a list of the best possible outcomes that I could see instead. Writing those down made me realize just how sad I had really become, because my best case scenario included things like getting enough sleep and recovering from sickness. In that period, I was also only seeing Jace in a taxi for around half an hour each night, and I remember writing that it would just be so nice to have more time. This part is what I think will be the hardest to talk about. I don't know where everyone's placed right now, so please check the links in the description if you need to reach out for someone to talk to. A few months ago, I found out that someone I used to work with had died from suicide. Unfortunately, it had been a while since we'd talked, but our last messages were about how he'd wanted to pick up art supplies on the weekend and paint something for the first time in many years. When I asked what he wanted to paint, he had said the moon. There are so many things that I feel from this grief, but I'm still processing it and also want to respect his family's privacy. It is strange though, because it was all reported on so publicly by financial journals, and I feel awful every time I think about that. One of the articles ended with a report on the law firm's annual profits, and I hate that in these contexts it always comes down to that. So today I'm going to remember him while drawing the moon instead, and really just wish that it could have been better. This is the first photo that Jace and I ever took of the moon. It was a few years ago in Istanbul. We'd just picked up a camera and loved starting to capture our own memories. I didn't start taking photos with an end goal, I just couldn't put the camera down. But if I could go back and show my past self the things that we'd be able to do if I just kept going, I would love to tell them that we've been able to shoot for hotels, tour companies, tourism boards, airlines, car brands, outdoor campaigns, and weddings in so many incredible places. It actually seems strange to look back at now because I was so unclear about where it could go at the time. It's probably natural for other people to have doubts about how you're going to do something when they can't clearly envision it, and they'll usually have even more doubts if it's something that they've never done themselves. But those doubts are not going to help you learn, and your passions don't really need to answer any of those questions anyway. I feel like a job title will also never be able to answer everything. I make changes all the time now, much more easily, and we could go through a whole resume if we wanted to, but what I've really become is someone who can be calm a lot of the time, and someone who prioritizes life. I also have enough space and energy now to follow curiosity, and I don't really feel like I'm doing anything new. Instead, I'm just going back to the things that I've always loved doing since I was young. While I was still trying to keep up the corporate career, I had to completely set aside a lot of things that I really enjoyed. I worked a lot, but I still had so many ideas for artworks and even started a few of them, but I just couldn't make consistent time for creativity. Around then, my grandpa also passed away. He was always the first person that I showed my drawings to while I was growing up. So after that happened, I actually didn't feel like making anything for quite a while. I went from drawing something nearly every day or week when I was younger to not drawing for months and years. And the longer I left it, the harder it seemed to be to pick it back up. But this year, I feel like I woke up an artist. It's not that I woke up and was something different, but more like I'd woken up a version of myself that was laying low. I turned my apartment into an art studio. I started keeping a small drawing on the table, and I eventually started painting for the first time. I found that it gets easier to make changes if you can reduce the time between having an idea and taking action. It's definitely hard to do this when you're stressed, because in that position, you're usually only reacting to things that are urgent and pressing, and it's more difficult to make decisions proactively or by looking forward. One thing that helps to take the pressure off is to set intentions rather than goals. If you're feeling lost, goals can easily carry a lot of external expectations because they come with more ideas around what success is supposed to look like or how fast you're supposed to get there. But intentions can feel more grounded and more personal. They don't need to mean anything to anyone else and are just about what you need right now. So instead of setting a target that's far away, like a goal around what you want to be next, you could start by setting an intention around how you'd like just one day to feel. Maybe it's more calm or more creative, and it can be easier to find small things that align with that feeling every day after. Once I started taking small actions for myself, everything eventually found more momentum. I got back into drawing again by starting with very small sketches. I didn't aim for anything too big and didn't have any pressure on them at all. But I realized that I didn't actually own many of my own artworks, and I'd always wanted to recreate some of the photos that I'd taken with Jace. So I started looking at all of our albums and picked up a blank sketchbook, and pretty quickly I had a whole collection. Each book actually fits around 30 drawings, and I've already finished a few of them, so maybe I can start by showing you the very first one. It's of a photo that I took of Jace in a lake in Slovenia, and it was just taken on my phone. This was a long time before we started photography or filming, so I don't have any footage of the process behind doing this drawing. But I do remember at the time that it was taken, I clearly thought to myself that I would love to draw or paint it one day. So I think I've always known that when I started making things again, this would be the first scene that I drew. I also have a few other finished drawings, but I can't decide which one I want to go next to this one. So I'm just kind of keeping the first page blank for now, but maybe I can show you some of the options. Before you take the first step, the most daunting thing is that you usually can't see the next ones. But it's also the most exciting part of it because they will usually take you a lot further than you can imagine. At the start of this year, I decided that I wanted to try painting for the first time. The first things that I needed to do were to pick up supplies and set up an easel, but I feel like I also had to get over a mentality that I was someone who couldn't paint just because I'd never tried it before. It sounds wild to say now, but in the last few months since starting to film, I've been able to create my first oil paintings and turn them into prints, which are now in other people's homes around the world. I've finished my first painting commission, which was over 1 meter tall. I've also been able to collaborate on my first art video partnerships with brands, and I'm starting to paint some of my favorite memories. I couldn't have predicted any of these things at the start of this year, but every opportunity has come out of trying anyway. Most things really are just a continuation, even when they might look like a start or an end. I met my friend Sarah at the law firm, and we actually sat next to each other every day. At the time, she was doing a lot of resin art and I was editing a book, so I asked her if she could create the cover for it. This feels like a lifetime ago, and both of our styles have completely changed since then, but we always shared ideas with each other, and recently we've had more energy for them as well. This year, we decided to start making a homewares collection together. It's strange to think about because when we first met, neither of us had even tried things like pottery, photography, or design. while we were working in the law firm, I think we both would have had a lot of doubts about how to even start something like this on top of everything else that we were trying to balance. But in the time since then, we've just experimented and learnt so much. And now, following any new idea that we have doesn't feel unachievable or hard, it just feels uplifting. If it ever feels like there isn't enough time or energy for things like this again, I come back to ways that I can make more space. It doesn't have to be a huge physical space. It could be as simple as setting up a table to use for creative projects. It also doesn't have to be a huge mental space either. It could just be time to rest without needing to justify it or be productive. And once there is a bit of extra space, it's just so much easier for anything to grow. This book was printed for 100 years, so I guess if we can assume that I'll live to 100, it means that I'm about a third of the way through now. I'm not always that conscious of the passage of time, and honestly, I'm usually just really present and enjoying each moment as it comes. But I definitely am reminded sometimes of just how finite everything is and how quickly time passes by. I think sometimes that's been a really positive influence because it's made me make changes very quickly to make the most of life. And sometimes I really just don't think it's that serious. We can try new things anytime, especially if they're going to be interesting or uplifting in any way. But on the other hand, it can sometimes be an overwhelming feeling to feel as though there won't ever be enough time to do absolutely everything. I think the best way I can describe it is maybe the feeling that I want things to last for a bit longer than they actually can. But I think overall, having this has always given me a really strong impression that life also isn't that short, or at least I never want it to feel that way. It can be such a huge amount of time and filled with so many different experiences. And having it set out from start to finish like this really just shows that every single stage is a continuation. And in that way, every single day is also just as important. I tried to say this all in just one afternoon while I've been sitting in one place, and I've tried not to think too much about each part of it. But at the same time, I have wondered why it's something that I keep coming back to. It's definitely not to complain about something that I did when I know that it was also only a very short period of time and it was something that I changed anyway. I think it's because I can still see the past version of myself who just wanted time to recover, and I really wish I could show them how much better it would be than that. If you've watched this, thank you so much for spending time here. It would be great if you could subscribe to this channel for more art, but in the meantime, I hope it's just been a good place to slow down.